Oliver led them down the sidewalk at a slow, deliberate pace, stopping every few steps to check that they were still behind him. Each time he glanced back, his ears would flick forward, then he'd turn and keep moving. The officer let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "I can't believe I'm following a cat." I couldn't believe it either, but Oliver wasn't wandering. He was navigating, choosing a path like he already knew exactly where it led. He stopped near the fence separating our yard from the neighbors, sniffed the ground along the base of it, looked up at a side gate that was usually kept latched, then started talking again, that same insistent, layered meowing, quieter now, more like he was narrating something only he understood. The officer crouched and studied the area. Grass, dirt, nothing obvious. "There's nothing here," I said, feeling a little foolish standing on the sidewalk at 9 in the morning, watching a police officer take my cat seriously. Maybe Oliver had smelled a raccoon. Maybe this was nothing. The officer wasn't so sure. He stepped a few feet in the opposite direction, toward the street, testing something. Oliver ignored him completely. He walked straight to the gate and sat down in front of it, tail curled tightly around his paws. The officer walked further away, deliberately, watching Oliver from the corner of his eye. Oliver didn't follow. He stayed exactly where he was, eyes fixed on the gate, refusing to break focus. The officer turned back. Something in his expression had changed. The amusement was gone, replaced by the careful attention of someone doing their job. "He's not just wandering around," he said. "He's guiding us, on purpose." By now a neighbor had stepped onto her porch to see what was happening. A kid on a bike slowed down, watching. Someone across the street lifted their phone and started filming, the way people do when something feels like it might be worth remembering later. Oliver seemed to notice the audience and grow more frustrated by it. He meowed louder, sharper, pacing a tight line in front of the gate like he couldn't understand why everyone was standing around instead of doing something. "Okay, buddy," I said, crouching down to his level. "What are you trying to tell us?" Oliver looked at me for a second, really looked, the way he sometimes did when he wanted something and knew I wasn't understanding fast enough. Then he took off toward the backyard. We followed. The officer moved quickly now, one hand near his radio, no longer treating this as something to humor. Oliver cut around the side of the house, past a stack of firewood, and came to a stop beside a small storage shed tucked into the back corner of the yard. He sat there, dead still, and turned to look directly at the officer. Nobody moved. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees behind the fence line. Somewhere a screen door creaked and settled. Oliver meowed once, a single sharp sound, different from everything before it, almost final. Then silence. The officer looked at the shed, looked at Oliver, looked at me. Nobody said a word. The officer stepped closer to the shed, scanning the area carefully. Something was off. The latch on the side gate wasn't fully secured. The shed door, usually kept shut, was open just a crack, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Oliver hadn't moved. He stayed fixed on that one spot, eyes locked, tail flicking once. "Oliver, if this is nothing," I muttered, half joking to cut the tension, "you're paying my embarrassment bill." Oliver responded with an offended, drawn-out meow, like he'd understood every word. The neighbor on the porch laughed. Even the officer cracked a smile before turning serious again. He crouched by the shed, examining the disturbed dirt near the door, a faint scuff mark on the frame that didn't match normal wear. He glanced back at Oliver. "How long have you had a routine around this yard?" he asked me. "Every morning," I said. "Same spots, same time." He nodded slowly, piecing something together. Whatever Oliver had been reacting to wasn't random. It connected. The gate, the shed, the tension in his body since the moment he'd started screaming on the sidewalk. A pattern that made sense only once you stepped back and looked at the whole shape of it. The officer stood, hand resting on the doorframe. "Someone's been out here, recently." The words landed heavier than they should have for a quiet residential street on a Tuesday morning. I felt my stomach tighten. Oliver, satisfied, finally broke his stillness. He stood, stretched once, and sat back down, no longer pointing, no longer yelling, just watching, calm now, like his job was done. The officer looked at him for a long moment. "Your cat noticed this before we did." I didn't know what to say to that. I'd spent 3 years assuming Oliver's loudest moments were just noise, dramatic, attention-seeking, background static I'd learned to tune out. It had never occurred to me that some of it might have been real. I thought about all the times I'd told him to be quiet, all the mornings I'd laughed him off. Maybe I hadn't been listening as carefully as I should have. The officer crouched down in front of Oliver, speaking to him the way people sometimes do with animals when they've earned it. Quiet, sincere, a little embarrassed to be doing it out loud. "Good job, buddy." Oliver started purring immediately, loud and unmistakable. Then, just as quickly, he turned and walked a few feet away, tail high, like he'd already moved on to more important things. I laughed despite myself. I think he's used to being right. The officer straightened up, radioing in a quick update, his tone all business now, the earlier amusement replaced by focus. He'd take it from here, checking the property, following up with the neighbors, doing the parts that weren't mine to do. Before he turned to leave, he looked back at Oliver one more time. "I think we owe this cat a thank you." Oliver, sitting in a patch of morning sun near the fence, turned his head and looked straight at the phone still recording from across the street. He blinked once, slow and unbothered. Then he meowed, one last time, like he had the final word. Oliver walked home like nothing had happened. No triumphant strut, no lingering glance back at the shed or the officer still working the scene. He just walked through the front door when I opened it, jumped onto the couch, and started grooming his front paw like the last 20 minutes hadn't occurred. I stood there for a second, still catching up to what had just happened. By that evening the story had made its way through the house. My sister came by, heard the whole thing secondhand, and didn't believe a word of it until I pulled up the video someone had sent me from across the street. She watched it twice in silence. "He really just led a cop to a shed," she said. "He really did." Oliver sat nearby during all of this, entirely unimpressed, blinking slowly like the conversation didn't concern him. Word got around the neighborhood fast, the way it does on a street where everyone already knows everyone else's dog by name. Within a few days, people had started calling him Officer Oliver. The kid on the bike who'd stopped to watch waved at him through the window the next morning like he was checking in on a coworker. A neighbor 2 doors down joked that our block finally had its own security detail. Oliver, for his part, seemed to enjoy the attention more than he let on. He took to sitting in the front window longer than usual, watching the street like it was now officially his to watch. I started paying closer attention after that. Not because I expected another shed, another gate, another quiet Tuesday morning turned serious, but because I realized I'd been tuning him out for years without meaning to. There was the hungry meow, short and repetitive, the greeting meow, softer, almost a chirp, the annoyed meow when I moved his food bowl an inch to the left, the excited one, higher pitched, reserved for the sound of a treat bag, and now I knew there was another one, lower, insistent, different in a way I couldn't fully explain but could absolutely recognize the moment I heard it again, which happened sooner than I expected. One morning, not long after, I heard Oliver screaming at the front window, that same urgent layered sound from the sidewalk that day. I dropped what I was doing and rushed over, half convinced something was actually wrong. "What is it? What's wrong?" Oliver pointed one paw at the glass, staring hard at something outside. I looked. Empty street, nothing. I looked back at him. He looked back at me, unmoving, completely serious. I sighed. "You're not reporting the mailman again, are you?" Oliver let out one small, indignant meow. Right on cue, the mail carrier turned the corner and started up the walkway. Oliver exploded into a fresh round of yelling, tail puffed, entire body pressed against the window like he'd caught someone in the act. I laughed until my eyes watered. Some things apparently hadn't changed at all. That's the part people don't always understand when they hear this story. Oliver didn't become a different cat that day. He was still the same dramatic, loud, occasionally ridiculous animal who screamed at leaves and squirrels and, apparently, the mail. The difference wasn't in him. It was in how closely I was willing to listen. Oliver never learned a single word of English. He never will. But somehow, on one ordinary morning, he managed to say something that mattered, and someone finally understood him in time. That evening he curled up beside me on the couch, purring low and steady, eyes half closed in the last bit of sun coming through the window. Then his ears lifted, just slightly. He opened one eye, glanced toward the window, and let out a single quiet meow, soft this time, almost private, like he was simply keeping watch. I smiled, and didn't get up.